Hello everyone, I welcome you to this CEC lecture series. I am Nupur Chawla, teaching English Literature at Maitri College, Delhi University, and today's lecture is the second part of the lecture which is in discussion, that is Oscar Wilde, and it's titled Oscar Wilde, The Importance of Being Earnest. So as the title of the lecture itself suggests, that we are going to talk about the 19th century playwright cum poet Oscar Wilde, and particularly in discussion is this very famous play by him that's called The Importance of Being Earnest. In the previous lecture, we looked at a little background of the playwright. We looked at the art movement that he's associated with, what are the features of the movement, and therefore what can be the possible features of the text written by this playwright. And also we looked at, to an extent, the title of this play as well, that is The Importance of Being Earnest, and we saw that there seems to be some kind of a wordplay there, because while on the face of it we get a sense that the play could be talking about the significance of being sincere, the significance of being truthful, being honest, because that's what the word earnest means, but it's quite the opposite that the play actually talks about, right? Where the word earnest does not mean somebody who's sincere or honest, but in fact it's the word or it's the name of a fictitious persona in the text, right? So we're of course going to talk about it at length now, but what we say is that right at the outset we notice that how wit is an important part of this play. Now, if I talk about the characters, you see, the first character is Algernon Moncrieff. Now, Algernon is a young man living in England. He is associated with like his family background is has some kind of a nobility or has a noble blood in that sense, or there's an element of aristocracy to his background. But whether Algernon is an aristocrat or not is not very clearly mentioned right now. Why do we say that he's associated with the nobility? Because his aunt is Lady Bracknell. Okay, now Lady Bracknell, because as you can see that the word lady, is a prefix over there. The other now, if you notice that along with Algernon, within brackets one mentions the word Bunbury. Okay. So just keep this thing in mind, I'll come back to it. So Algernon, within brackets, Bunbury. What is Bunbury? Who is Bunbury? We'll just answer it in a bit. The next character is Lane, who's the manservant. And at the outset of the play, we see Algernon in conversation with his manservant, that is Lane. So the fact that we see that Algernon in a situation where he has a servant working for him, so we clearly understand that he is a person from a comfortable background. He is not a commoner per se. Then we have Cecily Cardew. Now Cecily Cardew is actually the daughter of the or let's say that she's actually the daughter of the person who had adopted Jack Worthing. That's the next character, right? So Jack Worthing, another man in the play, was adopted by Mr. Cardew, and his daughter, that is Cecily Cardew, was put under the guardianship of Jack Worthing. So Cecily is this young girl whose guardian is Jack Worthing, and where Jack Worthing himself is this young man, right? Now, as you notice, just like against Algernon, we've put in brackets the word Bunbury. Against Jack Worthing, we've put in brackets the word earnest. Now, I think you might have got a sense what these words mean, but of course I'll explain it to you in just a bit. Lady Bracknell, I told you, aunt of Algernon. Gwendolen. Now, Gwendolen is the daughter of Lady Bracknell, and in whom Jack Worthing has a kind of a love interest, right? So Jack Worthing and Algernon are friends. Okay, then we have Miss Prism. Miss Prism is the lady caretaker of Cecily, right? So if we were to put the characters in a kind of a pattern, so let's understand it this way: they're two friends, Algernon and Jack Worthing. Algernon has, as his aunt, Lady Bracknell, whose daughter is Gwendolen. Jack Worthing, who is friend of Algernon, is somewhat in love with, Gwendolen, who is again a cousin of Algernon, and we see that Cecily, who is under the care of Jack Worthing, inspires this kind of an affection in Algernon. So we see that there's a kind of a cross, interest within, with women in each other's lives, right? So these were broadly stating the characters that we come across in the text. Now you see that the play, if I were to tell you very quickly what the plot looks like, the play opens with this conversation between Algernon and Lane about marriage, all right? And then we see that how there are a lot of references to marriage when you read this play. We see that how Jack Worthing, another young man, wants to marry Gwendolen. Algernon, who is supposedly in love with Cecily, wants to marry Cecily, wants to get permission. Both the men are looking for permission. They conduct themselves in their day-to-day lives, but the entire play revolves around this this entire question of two young men wanting to marry these two women, and what goes on between these motives, right? So that is broadly stating the plot of this play. So of course the plot is not very complex, right? But when we read it, when we go into the details, we notice that a lot seems to be conveyed through these, so to say, not very serious actions that one notices in the play. So now coming to the serious part then, so what are the themes or what are the issues that Oscar Wilde touches upon? Why did we pick this play for discussion today? First, it's a satire on the institution of marriage. Again, a question, a topic which has been a favorite of writers at various points of time in history. Now, what does Oscar Wilde say about marriage? Is something very, very interesting. We'll discuss about that, right? And I say that it's a satire. So the moment I call something a satire, what does it mean? It makes fun of it, right? How does Oscar Wilde make fun of marriage? We'll just look at that through the quotations that we will go through. The second thing we say is that this play also is a satire on social propriety or social institutions. Now, when I say propriety means the aspect of being proper, the aspect that how there is an element of what we consider to be as proper along social lines, right? What is considered to be civil, what is considered to be a moral and a just behavior in society. So this entire idea of the social code, the moral codes, the code of propriety, that also is made fun of by the playwright over here. And the third important element of this play is wit. Now, even though I've talked about wit a bit, but these three things form the crux of the engagement of Oscar Wilde in this play. Now, you see, the moment you will notice that one of the common threads is a sense of satire, right? This play pokes fun at all these things. Now, the fact that institution of marriage is questioned, the fact that idea of society and the idea of social norms is questioned, very clearly establishes Oscar Wilde as an aesthete. Why? If you remember, in the previous lecture we discussed that one of the essential features of aestheticism is what? That it deals with the question of freedom. So the moment he questions these fixed institutions, the moment he questions these fixed norms of society, the moment he pokes fun at them, what is he doing? He's making us rethink about these fixities, and he's leading a way into freedom, right? And the manner in which he does this, by wordplay, by making you laugh, again establishes him as an aesthete, right? So let's very quickly look at some of the important observations from the text vis-a-vis these three issues which Oscar Wilde deals with. So first, marriage. All right, what we see is that Oscar Wilde belittles marriage as an institution. Belittles means makes fun of it. For Oscar Wilde, it's not something which is sacred. According to society, marriage is something which is sacred, sacrosanct. It's a relation that you enter into which cannot be, which has its set of rules and code. But what does Oscar Wilde think of it? Let's look at this. There's this, right at the outset, the manservant Lane is having a conversation with Algernon, and he makes a statement here, and I'll very quickly read that. He says, "I have had very little experience of it myself up to the present." Now, it over here refers to marriage. Algernon asks Lane, "What do you think about marriage?" And Lane says, "I have had very little experience of it myself up to the present. I have only been married once. That was in consequence of a misunderstanding between myself and a young person." Unquote. What do we see here? He says that I have very little experience in being married because I've just been married once. It is as if he's trying to say that marriage is meant to happen multiple times to people. And he says that I have very little experience because I've just been married once. So, right at the outset, hitting out at this idea of, maybe one can say being monogamous in marriage, by saying that, it is hitting out at this idea that how marriage is supposed to be. Once you're married, it's like once married, then married forever, right? So that's what the Victorian morality would say. Because at that time, the idea of divorce and the idea of separation was not, sanctioned by society. And this is exactly what Oscar Wilde is questioning. So when he makes fun of this kind of, marrying only once, we clearly see that he is, kind of attacking Victorian morality over here. So Lane says that I have very little experience in marriage because I've been married just once and not more. And then the other part of the statement is, and he said that was in consequence of a misunderstanding between myself and a young person. So what is he saying? He says that I'm married, but I'm married not because of love, but I'm married because of a misunderstanding. So it's as if marriages are result of misunderstandings, when and not a result of love and not a result of genuine companionship. So what is happening over here? This entire institution is being made fun of, and the idea of that sacrosanct aspect which is always associated with marriage is kind of questioned here, right? Now, the other thing that we notice in the play is that Oscar Wilde also mocks the institution of marriage and the limits that it puts on them. Okay, marriage as an institution which limits people, which curbs them. That is another point that Oscar Wilde seems to be raising in the text. Now, how does this point come about? There's a point in the play where Algernon makes his observation, and let's look at this. He says, and I quote, "The very essence of romance is uncertainty. If ever I get married, I will certainly try to forget the fact." Unquote. What is he trying to say? Over here he's trying to say that romance lies in being uncertain, or not in being uncertain, but romance lies in a situation which has uncertainty. It's the lack of surety, it's the lack of fixity That's what is romance. When you don't know what lies next, when every second moment is an adventure. That is for Oscar Wilde, romance. And he says that if I ever get married, Algernon says this, if I ever get married, I will certainly try to forget the fact. So he says that if I get married, I will forget that I'm married. Why? Because I want the romance to be intact. Why? Because romance can only thrive in uncertainty, and the moment I get married, the idea of certainty gets attached to it. So therefore, I would like to forget. So that's why he says, if ever I get married, I will certainly try to forget the fact. So what is Oscar Wilde trying to say here? He's trying to say that, the idea of fixity in marriage is something which he's making fun of, right? He's trying to maybe talk about a sense of fluidity. He's trying to talk about a sense of flexibility that we somewhat tend to forget the moment we talk about marriage, right? So he's kind of over here making fun of this institution which seems to limit individuals according to Oscar Wilde. So you see, all that we discussed about, the aesthetes or people belonging to the aesthetic movement, art movement, how they were freedom-loving, etc. All these things will now be put in perspective as we see what these artists' views were on the institutions, right? So that's what. These are the 2 points that he makes about marriage in the text. There are of course a lot of different other points as well, but we'll talk about one more here. We see that how marriage as an institution is seen to be as one which hampers the charm and individual possibility. That's how Oscar Wilde visualizes it. That the moment a person is married, they loses their charm. They lose their charm. They lose their possibility. How do we know this? Now, Miss Prism makes a statement. Miss Prism, who's a caretaker of Cecily, right? She says, and I quote, "No married man is ever attractive except to his own wife," unquote. Now, again, what does it mean? It means that, once a man is married, he ceases to be attractive. Something about the institution that it changes the individual. All the charm, all the possibility, all the potential that we carry as individuals, that we carry as humans, is taken away the moment we get into this institution, right? And so therefore she said that no married man is ever attractive except to his wife. Okay, so again, the point that Oscar Wilde seems to be making over here is that how this institution is kind of artificial. This institution limits people, puts limits on them, curbs them, and it is clearly to be, rethought, right? So these are some of the. This is one of the crucial attitudes that we notice in Oscar Wilde towards marriage, right? He is clearly reconsidering the institution. For him, it's no longer, or it is not a sacrosanct social entity, but instead it is something which needs to be questioned, right? Now, as you of course read the play, you will notice that how this becomes an important part of Oscar Wilde's points that he makes in the text. Now, the next important theme is that of social satire, right? Social satire, where Oscar Wilde seems to, poke fun at different aspects of society. Now, of course, one can also say that marriage also is part of the social satire in this play. But you see, particularly in this instance where Jack Worthing talks about his role as a guardian to Miss Cecily, okay, and how by virtue of being a guardian, he is supposed to adopt a moral tone, okay. Jack is talking about this with Algernon at one point in the play. Now, when he's talking about this idea of guardianship and how it impels him to adopt a moral tone, he makes an observation there, and let's look at that quotation. He says, and I quote, "And as a high moral tone can hardly be said to conduce very much to either one's health or one's happiness. In order to get up to town, I have always pretended to have a younger brother in the name of Ernest, unquote. Now over here, two things are happening. First, he is clearly making fun of the idea of morality. He says that a high moral tone. So you see, on the one hand, he says that as a guardian, I am supposed to adopt a high moral tone because that's what is required of my role as a guardian. But then at the same time, he says that as a high moral tone can hardly be or can hardly be said to conduce very much to either one's health or one's happiness. So means what? That morality or moral tone doesn't make one happy, is not good for one's health, as he says, right? So morality is clearly suspect. What is happening here? Oscar Wilde is making fun of the age just gone before him, that is 19th century Victorianism. In Victorian era, morality, social code, uprightness, all these were of topmost priority. And Oscar Wilde tries to overturn these aspects, and one can say he also tries to question Victorian hypocrisy, right? So when he says that, when Jack says that this is something which is not good for one's health and happiness, he says, and that's why I have a younger brother in the name of Ernest. Now, who's this younger brother? This is the fictitious persona we've been talking about, right? So he says, because I want to escape this entire moral code, I have created this fictitious persona that is of Ernest. So whenever he has to, escape a situation, he takes the plea of Ernest, his younger brother, who needs him, and he goes away from there, right? So what do we see? We see that Oscar Wilde shows characters how they are, kind of craving for freedom. How they are bending rules. They are bending a sense of right and wrong. They are inventing things which don't exist in order for the sake of freedom, right? So therefore, one can see that this aspect of the invented personae in the play clearly points towards this tendency to escape obligation, particularly social obligation. So the fictitious persona of Ernest, which is created by Jack, seems to be or works as a escape route. Escape from what? Social obligations, right? Whenever he doesn't want to be a part of any situation, he says, my younger brother Ernest needs me, right? Now likewise, Algernon also has this fictitious persona by the name of Bunbury, okay? And let's look at this quote. He says, I have invented an invaluable permanent invalid called Bunbury in order that I may be able to go down into the country whenever I choose, unquote. Now look at the word invented. He says, I have invented. Invented means that there is no person in real as Bunbury, but it's just a figment of imagination that he's created for others. So, and he's a permanent invalid. Invalid means who is handicapped, right? So Algernon has created this person Bunbury, who is a handicap, and again, just like the fictitious persona Ernest helps Jack, likewise the fictitious persona of Bunbury helps Algernon to escape any obligation or social responsibility. So what do we see? We see characters in search for freedom, in search for a situation where they are not tied down by any limitations. Okay. The other thing that we also notice over here is that how people engage in pleasure. So again, you see, freedom, pleasure, these were the terms that we had talked about, that how they are central values of an aesthete. So we've talked about freedom. Now coming to pleasure. Now in the play, you see that there's a reference of characters engaging in pleasure, and this again becomes a way of Oscar Wilde directly taking pot shots at Victorian hypocrisy. So Victorianism would not want people to engage in sense experience. it would not want it would not want people to engage in something which is evokes desires, right? So now let's see what Lady Bracknell does in this play. She says, and I quote, "I had some crumpets with Lady Harbury, who seems to be living entirely for pleasure now," unquote. So what do we have? We have characters in Oscar Wilde living entirely for pleasure. Can a Victorian artist write about this? No. Right? This is the point of distinction between Oscar Wilde, the aesthete. Right? Now the other aspect of social satire after marriage and all these points is that of education. Right? Now we also see that how education is also suspect. Oscar Wilde says, Lady Bracknell says that the whole theory of modern education is radically unsound. In England, education produces no effect whatsoever. If it did, it would pose a serious danger to the upper classes, unquote. Now, Lady Bracknell herself is a upper class woman. Now, she is commenting on the situation of education. She says that it is radically unsound. The entire theory of modern education is unsound. It is of no relevance. And particularly in England, education produces no effect whatsoever on people who are studying. Because if it had any effect, then it would wake people up, it would educate people, and with that education, with that awareness, they would question the upper classes, who are by nature exploitative. So again, another institution which comes under scanner after marriage, that is education, right? Now we also see that at another level, the sanctity of what we know as relations is also questioned by Oscar Wilde, right? Now in Victorian England, the relationship, let's say, of a mother and a daughter, the relationship of maybe an aunt or a woman and a young girl would be somewhat, sacred. Like there would be some codes to every relation. But Oscar Wilde even destabilizes this. Let's see what he says. Algernon at one place says, and I quote, "Relations are simply a tedious pack of people." Tedious means who are very, kind of difficult to handle. Relations are simply a tedious pack of people who have not got the remotest knowledge of how to live, nor the smallest instinct about when to die, unquote. Now you see here clearly he is making fun of relatives that everyone has. He says that they're a pack of tedious people. Nobody likes them because they do not have the remotest knowledge of how to live, meaning they will keep on interfering in your life, they will keep on doing things which make you unhappy. So that's why he says that they do not have remotest knowledge of how to live and nor the smallest instinct about when to die. So it's almost like saying that relatives are a kind of a thorn in everybody's flesh. So again, this is Oscar Wilde's view, which is in just opposition of what Victorian morality would say. All right. So that's why we say that there's a very enhanced sense of social satire where Oscar Wilde quite radically upturns everything that we would otherwise consider sacred. Now coming to the last point, which is wit. We've been discussing about wit in his play all throughout, but let's very quickly see how particularly does it play out. First, we see that wordplay is witnessed in dialogue. So wordplay becomes one of the means for Oscar Wilde to engage in wit, right? And Algernon says this, and I'll quote, "The amount of women in London who flirt with their own husbands is scandalous. It looks so bad. It is simply washing one's clean linen in public," unquote. Now what is he doing? He says flirting with husbands is scandalous. What is he trying to say? He's trying to say that a woman, once she is married to her husband, is not supposed to flirt with him. Now what is flirting? It basically is a healthy exchange, a healthy teasing exchange between a man and a woman. But according to him, once you're a husband and wife, you're not supposed to do that. Why? Because marriage as an institution is according to Oscar Wilde, not very, progressive. So therefore, it is scandalous, he says, right? Now look at the word scandalous, again used very smartly. Scandal is something which is done outside of the social norms, but marriage clearly is within social norms. So while talking about men and women, husband and wives, he is using the word scandal, clearly inverting the entire idea, right? We also see that how wit unfolds at the level of absurdity of logic and language as well. How when the normal logic is inverted, that also creates space for wit, and that's the last instance that we take for discussing this. Lady Bracknell says, "I think it is high time that Mr. Bunbury made up his mind whether he was going to live or to die. Nor do I approve of the modern sympathy with the invalids. Illness of any kind is hardly to be encouraged." Unquote. Now, Lady Bracknell is saying that Mr. Bunbury, who is an invalid, who is so to say, a person with who's in handicap, she says that it's enough of him being sick. Please let him decide whether he wants to live or to die. Is it in our hands? Of course not. It's a very absurd logic that she is using, right? And that's what causes laughter. And she says that I do not approve of modern sympathy with the invalids. I don't know why people are sympathetic towards the differently abled, she says. Why? Because she said that illness of any kind is hardly to be encouraged. Now imagine, does anybody fall sick of their own volition? Of course not. But the fact that it's a completely absurd logic that she uses while talking about the differently abled becomes a source of, so this absurdity becomes a source of wit over here. So what have we seen? That this play is very, very rich in overall as being a social satire, the institution of marriage, the institution of education, the institution of social relations or relatives in that sense, if we can call it that, or family relations, stands completely inverted, stands questioned, and what is the method of doing that adopted by Oscar Wilde? That is wit. And we also discussed that how wit unfolds at various levels, two of those levels being A, deployment of absurdity of logic, and B, wordplay, right? Of course, there are other elements and other layers to wit, which I'm sure you will be able to figure out when you read the play. But with these thoughts in mind, I hope that you will be able to understand this play, the importance of being earnest, and go into the further layers along the lines that we have discussed. Thank you.